I am Tegan Willis, an Army officer who has spent half my life protecting the country, but failed to protect my own home. At Gavanni's, the most expensive restaurant in DC, when I intended to tell Robert that I had cancer, he cut me off with 3 cold words. I want a divorce. He didn't look into my eyes that have seen comrades fall, but at his phone screen, where his 28-year-old secretary was texting urgently. He said I was too rigid, too manly, and that he needed freshness. He threw our 20 years of marriage into the trash right when the waiter brought the dessert, without ever knowing. I am carrying a death sentence inside me, and he has just personally activated a time bomb in his own father's will. They think I will collapse or beg, but they forget one thing. A soldier never retreats when ambushed. They only change tactics, and my revenge will be colder than any winter in Vermont. Comment, Semper Fi, and subscribe to the channel if you believe traitors never deserve the spoils. This is how I teach my ex-husband his final lesson in honor. The drive from Walter Reed National Military Medical Center to downtown DC usually took 40 minutes, but tonight it felt like seconds. My hands, gripping the steering wheel of my sedan, were trembling. It wasn't the traffic on I-395, it was the manila envelope sitting on the passenger seat. Inside was the pathology report. Stage 2. Aggressive. I needed Robert. For 20 years, I'd been the strong one, the one deploying to combat zones, the one managing household logistics with military precision. But tonight, the lieutenant colonel needed to be just a wife. I parked the car, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, pale, tired, but composed, and tucked the medical file into my oversized leather tote. Gavanni's was dimly lit, smelling of truffle oil and old money. It was the kind of place where senators made backroom deals and lobbyists courted clients. Robert was already seated at our usual table near the window, swirling a glass of Pinot Noir. He looked impeccable. A bespoke navy suit, a silk tie, and a haircut that probably cost more than a private's monthly salary. He was the picture of a successful DC partner. But as I approached, he didn't stand up. He didn't smile. He checked his Rolex. "You're late," he said, not looking at me. "Traffic was bad near the hospital," I said, sliding into the chair. My knees felt weak. "Robert, I have to tell you something. I went to see the specialist today and—" He held up a hand, silencing me. The gesture was dismissive, cold. "Tegan, stop. Please don't start with the drama. I've had a hell of a day at the firm." He finally looked at me, his eyes scanning my outfit with undisguised distaste. I was wearing my charcoal pantsuit, practical, professional, the armor I wore to the Pentagon. "Is that what you wore to our anniversary dinner?" He sighed, shaking his head. "Look around, Tegan. The other women here. They're wearing dresses. They look soft. Feminine. You look like you're about to court-martial me." I felt a lump form in my throat, choking back the words I had prepared. "I have cancer." The words died on my tongue. "I came straight from work," I managed to say, clutching my napkin under the table to hide the tremors in my hands. "That's the problem," Robert said, leaning back. "It's always work. It's always the mission. Living with you, it's like living with a superior officer, not a wife. I need a woman who knows how to be a woman, someone who brings peace, not intensity." His phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, and for a split second, his face softened. It was a look I hadn't seen directed at me in years. "Is that her?" I asked. The intuition that had kept me alive in the field kicked in. "Your secretary, Jessica." Robert didn't deny it. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. "She's 26, Tegan. She's full of life. She's fresh. She doesn't look at me with those judging eyes of yours. She makes me feel like a man, not a subordinate." The waiter arrived, placing 2 plates of tiramisu on the table. "Happy anniversary," the young man beamed, oblivious to the fact that he was serving dessert to a corpse. Robert picked up his spoon. "I want a divorce, Tegan. I've already spoken to the lawyers. I want this done quickly and quietly. No scenes, no fighting." He took a bite of the cake, casual as could be. I'm taking Jessica to the Hamptons next week. I want the papers signed before I leave. I need a clean slate. Next week. I stared at the tiramisu. The cocoa powder on top looked like dust. Next week, while he was playing tennis in the Hamptons with a girl young enough to be his daughter, I would be sitting in a chemo chair, poison dripping into my veins, fighting to keep my hair, my dignity, my life. My hand moved to my bag. I could pull out the file right now. I could slam the cancer diagnosis on the table. I could make him stay. Guilt is a powerful weapon. But then I looked at him, really looked at him. He was checking his reflection in the wine glass, fixing his tie. He didn't care. If I told him, he would stay out of pity. He would resent me every day for dying too slowly, for ruining his fresh new life. And I remembered his father, Colonel George Mitchell, a true Marine. I remembered the conversation we had years ago about the trust fund, the morality clause. If that boy ever dishonors his vows, George had said, he doesn't get a dime of my legacy. Robert didn't know. He was so arrogant, so sure of his inheritance, that he had never read the fine print. If I told him I was sick, the divorce might be paused. The clause wouldn't trigger. But if I let him walk away, if I let him abandon me for a mistress while I was dying, he would be digging his own financial grave. A strange calm settled over me. It was the calm of a sniper waiting for the wind to settle. I released the medical file in my bag. I grabbed a pen from my purse instead. I took the white linen cocktail napkin from under my water glass. "You're right, Robert," I said. My voice was steady, void of emotion. "You deserve that freshness." I signed my name on the napkin in bold black ink. Tegan Willis. "You have your freedom," I said, sliding the napkin across the table like a signed treaty. "Go to the Hamptons. Be happy." Robert blinked, surprised by my surrender. He smiled, a relieved, triumphant smile. "I knew you'd be reasonable. You're always so pragmatic. That's why I married you." He signaled for the check, eager to leave, eager to call Jessica. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. "I'll have the papers sent to the house tomorrow. You'll need to move out, of course. I'm selling the place." He walked away without looking back. He didn't see me sitting there, alone, with an untouched dessert and a terminal diagnosis. He didn't know that by walking out that door, he had just declared war on the wrong soldier. I whispered to the empty chair, "Semper Fi, Robert. But you were never faithful." I picked up my bag. The war had begun. And I had the ultimate weapon, his own father's will, and the silence he had forced upon me. 48 hours. That was the timeline given to me by the process server who showed up at my door at 0700 hours the morning after our dinner. He didn't look me in the eye, just handed me a thick envelope embossed with the logo of a shark-tier law firm. Not Robert's firm, but one of his rivals. Professional courtesy, I supposed. The letter inside was clear, drafted in cold, unyielding legalese. It was an emergency motion for exclusive use and possession of the marital residence. The reasoning? To prevent psychological conflict and maintain a stable environment. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. I was the one with cancer. I was the one who had paid the mortgage for 15 years out of my army salary, while Robert blew his bonuses on sports cars and tailored suits. Yet, I was the one being designated as the stressor that needed to be removed. I didn't fight it. I didn't have the energy to fight a legal battle and a biological war simultaneously. I went to Home Depot, bought 20 cardboard boxes, and began to dismantle my life. By noon on the second day, the living room was a maze of brown cardboard. I was packing my dress blues, my formal uniform, folding the dark fabric with the gold braid carefully, treating it with more respect than my husband had treated our vows. I placed my shadow box, heavy with the Bronze Star and the Meritorious Service Medal, on top of a stack of books. Then, the front door opened. They walked in together. Robert, looking annoyed, and Jessica, looking like she was on a shopping spree. She wasn't wearing business attire today. She was wearing designer yoga pants and an oversized sweater, clutching a Starbucks cup like it was a scepter. "I thought she'd be done by now," Jessica said, her voice loud, echoing off the hardwood floors I'd refinished myself 2 years ago. She's finishing up, Robert muttered, loosening his tie. He wouldn't look at me. He stood by the fireplace, pretending to check his emails. I continued taping a box, the ripe of the packing tape the only sound I made. I was a ghost in my own home. Jessica began to wander around the room, touching things. She ran a manicured finger over the leather armchair in the corner, my reading chair, the one I sank into after long days at the Pentagon, the one worn soft by years of use. Babe, she called out to Robert, scrunching up her nose. This has to go. It's absolutely hideous. I froze. My hand hovered over the tape dispenser. It looks like something from a thrift store, she continued, laughing lightly. It's so tacky, so outdated. We need something modern here, maybe a white sectional. This whole room smells like old people. I stood up slowly. The urge to correct her, to tell her that chair was Italian leather and cost more than her entire wardrobe, rose in my throat. But I swallowed it. Engaging with her was below my pay grade. Robert finally looked up. Yeah, he said, eager to please her, eager to erase any trace of me. We'll call the junk haulers tomorrow. Just mark whatever you want gone, Jess. Junk! My sanctuary was now junk. You heard him, Jessica said, looking at me with a smirk that didn't reach her eyes. You might as well leave it. Save yourself the heavy lifting. I didn't say a word. I grabbed the box with my uniforms, hoisted it onto my shoulder, ignoring the sharp pull of pain in my chest, and walked out the front door. I loaded the last box into the trunk of my 10-year-old sedan. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw them through the bay window. Jessica was spinning around in the center of the living room, arms wide, claiming her territory. Robert was watching her, smiling. I shifted gears and drove away. I didn't cry. Soldiers don't cry during the retreat. We wait until we reach the new base. My new base was a studio apartment in a decaying complex in Alexandria, Virginia. It was all I could secure on short notice with no credit check. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and stale cigarette smoke. The walls were paper thin. I could hear the neighbor's TV blaring a game show and a couple arguing about money 2 doors down. I carried the boxes up 2 flights of stairs, my breath catching in my lungs. The chemo port implanted in my chest yesterday throbbed with a dull, metallic ache. The apartment was cold. A single flickering fluorescent bulb illuminated the peeling beige paint. I set the box of medals on the floor and sat on a cheap mattress I had ordered online. It was 9 p.m. That's when the pain hit. It wasn't the cancer. It was the Neulasta shot, the white blood cell booster the nurse had administered yesterday. She had warned me. It might cause some bone pain, she had said. That was an understatement. It felt like my skeleton was trying to expand inside my skin. My femurs throbbed as if they were being crushed in a vice. My hips burned. A deep, rhythmic pulsing radiated from my marrow, a biological siren screaming that my body was under siege. I curled up on the bare mattress, clutching my knees. Sweat beaded on my forehead. Robert, I whispered into the darkness, a reflex from 20 years of habit. But there was no Robert. There was no warm hand to rub my back. There was no glass of water brought to the bedside. There was only the sound of the refrigerator humming and the distant sirens on the highway. I was alone. Truly, completely alone. I forced myself to sit up. The pain was blinding, but I had a schedule. I dragged myself to the bathroom. The lighting was harsh, unflattering. I looked at the woman in the mirror. My hair was thinning. My skin was gray. My eyes were hollow. Get it together, Willis, I hissed at my reflection. I opened the medical kit on the sink. Alcohol swabs. A pre-filled syringe of blood thinners. Another joy of the treatment. I pinched the skin of my stomach, just as the nurse had taught me. My hands were steady now. The trembling had stopped. I pushed the needle in. The burn was sharp, grounding. It cut through the bone pain, a focused point of agony that I could control. I pushed the plunger down, withdrew the needle, and tossed it into the sharps container. I walked back into the main room. I couldn't sleep. The pain was too loud. I opened the box marked desk. I pulled out a framed photo from our wedding day. Robert and I under the crossed swords of the honor guard. We looked so young, so invincible. I looked at it for a long moment, then placed it face down on the nightstand. The glass made a sharp click against the cheap laminate wood. Then, I reached into my bag and pulled out the large envelope from Walter Reed. I took out the X-ray film of my chest, the one showing the shadow on my lung. I took a piece of blue painter's tape and stuck the X-ray to the wall, right opposite the bed where the wedding photo should have been. This was my reality now. Not the man who betrayed me, not the house I lost, but the enemy inside my chest. I lay back down, staring at the ghostly image of my own ribs under the streetlights filtering through the blinds. The bone pain throbbed, a relentless drumbeat. "You are a soldier, Tegan," I said to the empty room, my voice cracking but firm. "You do not die, not like this, not for them." I closed my eyes and prepared to endure the night. The first battle of the war had been lost, but I was still standing, and tomorrow I would begin to sharpen my knife. They call it the Red Devil. That's the nickname for doxorubicin, the chemotherapy drug dripping into my veins at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. It's a bright, terrifying crimson, looking less like medicine and more like engine coolant. Tuesday, Rs 800 hours. While Robert was presumably waking up in crisp Egyptian cotton sheets in the Hamptons, I was sitting in a vinyl recliner in Bethesda, watching poison enter my body to kill the other poison growing inside me. The infusion center was quiet, save for the rhythmic beeping of IV pumps. I was the only patient there alone. To my left, a young Marine with lymphoma had his wife holding his hand. To my right, an elderly veteran had his daughter reading to him. I had my phone and a bottle of lukewarm ginger ale. "Doing okay, Colonel?" the nurse asked, adjusting the drip. She was kind, but her eyes held that professional pity I was starting to despise. "I'm fine," I lied. The metallic taste in my mouth, like I had been sucking on old pennies, was already starting. The drive home was the real battle. Navigating I-495 traffic while nausea rolled over me in waves required more focus than any tactical operation I'd ever planned. My 10-year-old sedan had no shocks, and every pothole felt like a physical assault. I made it as far as the parking lot of my shabby apartment complex before I lost the fight. I barely got the door open before I leaned out and retched onto the hot asphalt. I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, sweat stinging my eyes. A neighbor walked by, a guy in a stained undershirt walking a pit bull. He stared at me, then looked away, disgusted. I wanted to yell, "I'm a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army, I matter." But I didn't have the breath. I just wiped my mouth with a fast food napkin and dragged myself upstairs. 2 weeks later, the fallout truly began. I was in the shower when it happened. I ran my hands through my hair to rinse out the shampoo, and when I pulled them away, they were covered in wet, blonde clumps. I stared at my hands, the water mixing with tears. I didn't know I was crying. It wasn't just hair. It was my armor. It was the last thing that made me feel like me. I turned off the water and stepped out, dripping wet, shivering in the drafty bathroom. I looked in the mirror. Patchy. Mange-ridden. Defeated. I didn't think. I couldn't let the cancer take it piece by piece. That was a surrender. I opened the cabinet and found Robert's old electric beard trimmers, one of the few things he'd forgotten to pack. I plugged them in. The buzz was loud in the small, tiled room. Bzzzt. The first pass took a strip right down the middle. I looked like a reverse mohawk. Bzzzt. The sides. Bzzzt. The back. 10 minutes later, Tegan Willis was gone. A stranger stared back at me. Her scalp was pale, vulnerable. Her eyes looked too big for her face. I looked like a chemo patient. There was no hiding it now. I sat on the cold tile floor, surrounded by piles of wet, blonde hair, and reached for my phone. I needed a distraction, a connection, anything. I opened Instagram. The algorithm, cruel and efficient, put it right at the top of my feed. A photo posted by Jessica. Location: the Hamptons. It was a close-up of her hand holding a mimosa glass against a backdrop of a pristine golf course. But the focus wasn't the drink. It was the ring on her finger. I stopped breathing. It was a vintage diamond ring, platinum setting, old European cut. It wasn't a new ring. It was the ring. It was Robert's grandmother's ring, the one his mother had worn for 40 years, the one I had worn for 20. Robert had asked for it back for cleaning a month ago. I had given it to him, trusting him. Jessica's caption read, "Finally found my forever. True. Love. Blessed. Heirloom. Upgrade. Upgrade." She was calling herself an upgrade while wearing my history on her finger. She was drinking champagne while I was bald and vomiting in a bathroom in Virginia. I felt a vibration in my hand. A text message popped up from Brenda, a mutual friend from the Officers' Wives Club. I hadn't heard from her in weeks. Brenda. "Hey Tegan, I just wanted to give you a heads up. Robert was at the club yesterday. He's telling everyone you guys split because you're having some kind of mental breakdown. He said you're menopausal and unstable and that he feared for his safety. Just thought you should know." My vision blurred. It wasn't the tears this time. It was pure, unadulterated rage. He wasn't just leaving me. He was rewriting history. He was painting me as the crazy ex-wife to justify his affair. He was using my age, my biology, my service-induced stress against me. He was stripping me of my reputation just as the chemo was stripping me of my hair. This is the moment where I ask you, have you ever been kicked while you were down? Have you ever watched someone steal your life while you were fighting to survive? If you are on my side in this war, please hit that like button right now. It helps more than you know, and leave a comment saying, "I stand with Tegan," so I know I am not fighting in this trench alone. Your support is the only army I have left. I looked at the phone screen, Jessica's perfect manicure, the stolen ring, Brenda's pitying text. I screamed, a raw, guttural sound that came from the bottom of my poisoned lungs. I pulled my arm back and punched the cheap drywall of the apartment. Crack! My knuckles split. The plaster crumbled. A hole the size of my fist appeared in the wall. Pain shot up my arm, sharp and electric. It felt better than the numbness. It felt better than the nausea. It felt like life. I looked at my bleeding hand. I looked at my bald head in the mirror. "You think I'm crazy, Robert?" I whispered, my voice trembling with a terrifying new resolve. "You think I'm weak?" I wiped the blood from my knuckles onto my hospital sweatpants. "I will survive this," I promised the empty room. "I will survive the Red Devil. I will survive the eviction. And I will survive to see the look on your face when I take that ring back." I picked up the phone and took a screenshot of Jessica's post. Evidence. The trench was lonely, and the enemy was partying on a golf course. But they had forgotten one thing. You never leave a soldier alive on the battlefield if you don't want them to come back for you. The knock on my door wasn't a question. It was a command. 3 sharp, rhythmic raps. Rap, rap, rap. I knew that knock. It was the sound of authority. It was the sound of the United States Marine Corps. I pulled my beanie down lower over my bald scalp, wrapped my oversized cardigan tighter around my shivering frame, and opened the door. Standing in the dim, flickering hallway of my apartment complex was Colonel George Mitchell, USMC, retired. My father-in-law. At 75, he still stood as if he were on the parade deck at Quantico. He wore a charcoal wool coat over a crisp button-down, his silver hair cut in a high and tight that hadn't changed since the Vietnam War. He looked out of place in this hallway that smelled of boiled cabbage and stale cigarettes, like a diamond dropped in the mud. "Colonel," I said, my voice raspy. I instinctively straightened my spine, despite the nausea roiling in my gut. He didn't say a word. He looked me up and down, his steel blue eyes, the only thing Robert had inherited from him, scanning me like he was assessing a battlefield. He looked past the baggy clothes, past the forced smile. "May I come in, Tegan?" His voice was gravel and old leather. I stepped aside. He walked into the studio apartment, his polished dress shoes clicking on the cheap laminate floor. He looked around at the boxes I still hadn't unpacked, the peeling paint on the walls, the single window overlooking the dumpster. "Robert said you wanted space," George said, turning to face me. "He said you were having a midlife crisis, that you wanted to find yourself." Is that what he said? I leaned against the kitchenette counter for support. Can I get you some water, George? Or tea? I think I have some Earl Grey. He ignored the offer. He took a step closer to me, then he stopped. He tilted his head slightly, sniffing the air. I know that smell, he said quietly. My heart hammered against my ribs. It's just cleaning supplies. The landlord uses cheap bleach. No, George said. His eyes locked onto mine, stripping away my defenses. I smelled that smell on my Martha for 2 years before she passed. It's the smell of metal, the smell of chemicals, the smell of a fight. He reached out, his hand hovering near my head. Take off the hat, Tegan. George, please. That is an order, Lieutenant Colonel. My hand trembled as I reached up. I pulled the gray wool beanie off. The silence in the room was deafening. George stared at my bald head, at the pale skin stretched tight over my cheekbones, at the dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. Stage 2, I whispered. Breast cancer. Aggressive. I'm in the middle of chemo. The stoic mask of the Marine colonel crumbled. His jaw trembled. Tears, hot and fast, welled up in his eyes and spilled over his weathered cheeks. Oh, God, he choked out. He crossed the distance between us in 2 strides and pulled me into a hug. It wasn't a polite social hug. It was a desperate embrace. He held me tight, burying his face in my shoulder, shaking with silent sobs. I didn't know, he wept. I didn't know. I didn't want you to worry, I said, patting his back, comforting him just as I had when his wife died 10 years ago. He pulled back, gripping my shoulders. His eyes were red, but the fire was back in them. Does he know? Does my son know? I shook my head. I tried to tell him at dinner. He cut me off. He asked for a divorce before I could get the words out. He said I was too hard, too old. George's face darkened. The grief was replaced by a cold, terrifying rage. He left you? While you are fighting this? He's moving Jessica in. He's taking her to the Hamptons. He thinks he's finally free to live the life he deserves. George turned away, pacing the small room. I failed, he muttered to himself. I raised a son of a bitch. I taught him how to shoot, how to tie a tie, how to shake a hand, but I failed to teach him how to be a man. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. He turned back to me, his expression deadly serious. Tegan, listen to me closely. Robert thinks I'm senile. He thinks I'm just an old ATM machine waiting to expire so he can cash out. George tapped the envelope against his palm. He's been waiting for his inheritance for 20 years. The trust fund, the Vermont house, the portfolio, it's worth millions. I know George, he talks about it all the time. He doesn't know about the amendment I made 5 years ago, George said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. After I saw how he looked at other women at the club, after I saw how he took you for granted. He handed me the envelope. It was heavy, wax-sealed. This is a copy of my last will and testament, George said. Inside there is a clause. Section 4, paragraph B, the morality clause. I looked at him, confused. What does it say? It says that the beneficiary, my son, only inherits the estate if he maintains an honorable standing in his marriage and community. If he divorces his spouse without just cause, or if the dissolution of the marriage is proven to be a result of his own infidelity or abandonment during a time of crisis, he gets nothing. My breath hitched. Nothing? Not a damn dime, George growled. It all goes to the Wounded Warrior Project. Every cent, the house in Vermont, the stocks, everything. He looked at me with intense clarity. But here is the catch, Tegan. If he knows about this, he won't divorce you. He's greedy, but he's not stupid. He will stay married to you, keep you in the basement like a prisoner, and wait for me to die so he can get the money. Then, he will divorce you. I understood immediately. It was a tactical standoff. So we can't tell him, I said. Exactly, George nodded. We need him to finalize the divorce. We need him to put it on paper that he is leaving you for another woman. We need him to nail his own coffin shut. He took my hand, the one with the split knuckles from punching the wall, and squeezed it. He threw you away like garbage, Tegan. He dishonored the vows. In my eyes, you are my child. You are the one with the honor. You are the soldier. This feels like a trap, I said, looking at the envelope. It is a trap, George smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a commander looking at an enemy walking into an ambush. And he is walking right into it. He smoothed the lapel of his coat. I'm old, Tegan. The doctors say my heart is failing. I might not make it to next Christmas, but I swear to you, I will live long enough to see justice done. He walked to the door, then paused. He looked back at me, bald, sick, living in a box, but standing tall. Don't beg him, George commanded. Don't ask for help. Let him think he's won. Let him think he's the king of the world. I will, I promised. Give him hell, Tegan, he whispered. Semper Fi. Semper Fi, Dad. He closed the door. I heard his footsteps fade down the hallway. I looked down at the envelope in my hands. It wasn't just paper. It was a weapon. Robert had the youth, the money, and the mistress. But I had the general. I walked over to the wall where my X-ray was taped. I slid the envelope behind a loose floorboard under my bed. Go ahead, Robert, I said into the silence. Dig your grave. I've got the shovel right here. The notifications on my phone were relentless. Ding, ding, ding. I was lying in my rented studio, nursing a cup of herbal tea that did nothing to settle the chemical nausea in my stomach. It had been 3 days since my hair fell out. 3 days since George handed me the envelope. I picked up the phone. It wasn't a text from a friend. It was a notification from TikTok. The algorithm, in its infinite cruelty, had decided that since I once stalked Jessica's public profile, I clearly wanted to see every single update she posted. The caption read, Vermont Reno, turning this gloomy dungeon into a chic farmhouse dream. Demo day. Vermont life. New chapter. My stomach dropped. I tapped the screen. The video opened with Jessica's face, filtered to perfection, beaming at the camera. She was wearing a white hard hat that looked ridiculous on her, paired with pristine designer overalls that had clearly never seen a day of labor. Hey guys, she squealed, her voice grating against my headache. So we are finally at the cabin in Vermont. And oh my God, you guys, it is so depressing in here. Like, literally a haunted mansion vibe. But don't worry, we are fixing it. The camera flipped around. I gasped. The air left my lungs as if I'd been punched in the gut. The Mitchell family cabin was a sanctuary. It was built in the 1920s, constructed from hand-hewn American oak and chestnut. The walls were dark, rich, and smelled of wood smoke and history. It was where Robert's grandfather had cleaned his rifle. It was where George had taught Robert to fish. It was where I had spent 20 Christmases, feeling safe, feeling home. In the video, the dark, majestic wood paneling was gone. It was white. Jessica had painted everything. The beams, the wainscoting, the hand-carved mantel, a blinding, sterile, soulless white. She was erasing a century of character with a bucket of Benjamin Moore Chantilly lace. See? Jessica narrated, panning across the destruction. It's so much brighter. We're going for that modern farmhouse aesthetic. Out with the old, in with the new. My hand gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. She wasn't just renovating a house, she was sanitizing a legacy. She was deleting the Mitchell history to make a background for her skincare unboxing videos. And look at this cute little lunch setup, she chirped. The camera panned down to the coffee table in the center of the room. That's when the rage hit me. It wasn't the hot, flashing anger of a lover scorned. It was the cold, lethal fury of a soldier witnessing a war crime. On the table sat a large open box of Domino's pepperoni pizza. Beside it were 2 crushed cans of White Claw hard seltzer. And underneath the pizza box was the tablecloth. It was a triangle. A folded triangle of heavy woven cotton. Dark blue with white stars visible on the top. It was the burial flag. It was the flag that had draped the coffin of Robert's grandfather, a World War II veteran who stormed the beaches of Normandy. It had been folded 13 times with absolute precision by an honor guard, encased in a glass shadow box, and displayed on the mantel for 50 years. Jessica had pried open the shadow box. She had taken out the sacred symbol of a soldier's ultimate sacrifice, and she was using it to catch the grease from her cheap pepperoni pizza. Sacrilege, I whispered, the word hissing through my teeth. I saw a grease stain blooming on the white star. I saw the condensation ring from the White Claw can soaking into the blue field. In the military, we are taught that the flag is a living thing. You never let it touch the ground. You certainly don't use it as a coaster for your trashy lunch. I took a screenshot. Then another. I recorded the screen. My hands were steady now. This wasn't just bad taste. This was desecration. This was the proof that Robert had lost all control, all honor. He was allowing this airhead to wipe her feet on his ancestors' graves. Just as the video looped back to the beginning, a text message banner dropped down from the top of the screen. Sender, Robert. I switched apps, my heart pounding a rhythm of pure adrenaline. Robert, I see you haven't signed the quitclaim deed for the Vermont house yet. I need that property liquid, Tegan. I'm giving you until Friday. If I don't have your signature, I'm removing you from the firm's health insurance policy. Open enrollment is closed. Good luck paying for your treatments out of pocket. I stared at the screen. He knew. He knew the chemo costs $20,000 a session. He knew that without that insurance, I would be bankrupt in a month and dead in 6. He was weaponizing my survival. He was holding a gun to my head, or rather, a gun to my immune system, to get me to sign away the very house his mistress was currently destroying. He thought I would panic. He thought I would see the whitewashed walls and the threat of medical bankruptcy, and I would fold. He thought I was the same woman who sat silently at Gavanni's. He was wrong. I looked at the screenshot of the pizza grease on the burial flag. I looked at the threat to cut off my life support. I dialed a number, not Robert's. I called the shark of a divorce lawyer I had hired, a woman named Helen who had a reputation for eating narcissists for breakfast. Tegan, Helen answered on the second ring. Is everything all right? No, I said. My voice was low, devoid of fear. He just threatened to cut my insurance if I don't sign the house over. That's illegal, Helen said instantly. That's a violation of the status quo order. We can file an emergency motion. No, I interrupted. Let him threaten. I have something better. What do you have? I have him letting his mistress use a World War II burial flag as a placemat for Domino's Pizza, I said. And I have him destroying the value of a historic asset. Silence on the line. Then Helen let out a low whistle. Oh, a jury in Virginia is going to hate him. We are not selling the Vermont house, Helen, I said, staring at the white walls on my screen. I don't care if he threatens to cut off my oxygen. We are not settling. We are not negotiating. What are your instructions, Colonel? Helen asked, her tone shifting from advisor to soldier. I looked at the X-ray on my wall. I thought of George weeping in my arms. I thought of the grease stain on the star. Hold the line, I commanded. We are going to take everything. I want the house, I want the portfolio, and I want him to watch us take it. Understood, Helen said. I'll draft the response. Semper Fi, Tegan. Semper Fi. I hung up the phone. I looked at the text from Robert one last time. Good luck paying for your treatments. I won't need luck, Robert, I said to the glowing screen. I have your father. And now, thanks to your girlfriend, I have the flag. I saved the screenshot into a folder named Ammo. The invasion of Vermont was an insult, but it was also a tactical error. They had exposed their flank, and I was going to make them bleed for every inch of white paint they slapped on those walls. The courier looked uncomfortable standing in the hallway of my apartment complex. He was wearing a uniform that was cleaner than the walls surrounding him, holding a large rigid envelope with both hands like it was a diplomatic pouch. Tegan Willis, he asked, eyeing the peeling paint on my door. That's me, I said, signing the digital pad. He handed me the envelope. It was heavy. Cream-colored cardstock, thick enough to be used as shingle. My name was calligraphed on the front in gold ink. Not a label, hand calligraphed. That alone cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I closed the door and sat on the edge of my mattress. I ran a finger under the wax seal, a custom monogram, M and J. I pulled out the card. It was a masterpiece of pretension. Heavy letterpress, gold foil edges, font that screamed old money, even though the intentions behind it were cheap. The future Mr. and Mrs. Robert Mitchell request the honor of your presence at an engagement and housewarming celebration. Location: the Mitchell Estate, Vermont. Dress code: black tie. Optional. I stared at the words, the future Mrs. Mitchell. We weren't even divorced yet. The ink on the filing papers was barely dry, and he was already printing invitations for his next wedding. And the Mitchell Estate? It was a cabin, a beautiful, historic cabin, yes, but calling it an estate was just Robert trying to project a Kennedy-esque fantasy onto a stolen inheritance. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Caller ID, Robert. I hesitated. My hand hovered over the red decline button. I didn't want to hear his voice. I didn't want to hear the gaslighting. But then I remembered Colonel George's advice. Let him dig his grave. I swiped green and put it on speaker. Did you get it? Robert's voice filled the small room. It was loud, slightly slurred. In the background, I could hear the distinct clink of ice against crystal and the murmur of a jazz playlist. He was drinking. I got it, I said, keeping my voice neutral. An engagement party, Robert? Really? We're still married. Formalities, he scoffed. I heard him take a sip of something. My lawyer says the judge will sign off any day now. Besides, Jessica wanted to celebrate. She's done such a great job with the house, Tegan. You wouldn't recognize it. It's modern. It finally has class. I looked at the screenshot in my gallery, the grease-stained burial flag. Class? Why send me an invite, Robert? I asked. You threw me out. You threatened my health insurance. Why invite me? Courtesy, he drawled. It's the polite thing to do. Shows we're amicable. Good for optics. He paused, and his tone shifted. It dropped lower, becoming nastier, stripped of the fake pleasantries. But honestly, Tegan, don't come. Excuse me? I sent it because I had to, he hiccuped slightly. But do us both a favor and just send a gift. Well, you look rough, Tegan. I saw you leaving the pharmacy the other day. The bald head, the pale skin, it's depressing. You look like a walking ghost. I gripped the edge of the mattress. You'd be a buzzkill, he continued, cruel and casual. This is a party for beautiful people, for the future. Nobody wants to look at a sick ex-wife while they're drinking champagne. It ruins the aesthetic. Tears pricked my eyes, but they were hot, angry tears, not sad ones. Is that all, Robert? No, he said, and his voice took on a greedy, excited edge. I just wanted you to know, Dad's not doing well. The doctors say it's congestive heart failure. He's kicking the bucket soon, Tegan, maybe before Christmas. My heart stopped. George. And you know what that means, Robert laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. Once the old man checks out, the trust releases, the Vermont house, the portfolio, everything. It's all mine and Jessica's. So, stay in your little apartment. Fade away. I've won. Click. The line went dead. He hung up. He sat there, drunk on scotch and hubris, celebrating his father's impending death because it meant payday. He thought the morality clause didn't exist. He thought he was untouchable. I sat in silence for a long time. The humiliation of his words about my appearance burned, but the rage at his disrespect for his dying father burned hotter. I stood up and walked to the small stack of belongings I had unpacked. I reached for the one book I had carried through 3 deployments in Iraq, my pocket Bible. The cover was worn leather, softened by sand and sweat. I opened it. I didn't need to search. The pages fell open to the bookmark I had kept there since Fallujah. Psalm 144, verse 1. I read it aloud to the empty room. My voice wasn't raspy anymore, it was low and dangerous. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. I looked at the invitation again. The gold foil glinted under the harsh fluorescent light. He wanted me to stay away because I was ugly, because I was a reminder of his betrayal, because I was depressing. He wanted a fight? No. He wanted a massacre. He wanted to bulldoze me. But he forgot that you don't judge a soldier by their haircut. You judge them by their aim. I picked up a pen. I flipped the RSVP card over. Name, Latines Cole, Tegan Willis. Accepts with pleasure. I stared at the card. For the first time in months, since the diagnosis, since the eviction, since the first drop of the red devil entered my veins, I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who just watched the prey walk into the trap. I have a question for you all. If your ex-husband called you ugly and bragged about inheriting money from his dying father, would you stay home and cry? Or would you crash that party and burn his world to the ground? If you are ready to see Tegan fight back, smash that like button right now. Leave a comment saying, "Train my hands" if you want to see justice served. I need to know you're with me. You want optics, Robert? I whispered, slipping the RSVP card into the return envelope. I'll give you optics. I'm coming, I said, sealing the envelope with a sharp press of my thumb. And I'm not coming empty-handed. I looked at the loose floorboard where I had hidden the copy of George's will. The party was in 2 weeks. I had 14 days to recover from this round of chemo. 14 days to find a dress that fit my broken body. 14 days to prepare for the final strike. Blessed be the rock. Let the battle begin. The wig sat on a styrofoam head on my bathroom vanity. It was a masterpiece of synthetic engineering, blonde, shoulder length, perfectly highlighted to mimic the hair I had lost. It cost $600. It was soft, bouncy, and undeniably feminine. It was exactly the kind of thing Robert wanted. It was a lie. I stared at it, then at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was pale. Her cheekbones were sharper than they used to be, carved out by weight loss and nausea. Her skull was covered in a soft fuzz of regrowth, hair that was coming back not blonde, but a striking, steely silver. No, I said aloud. I grabbed the wig. I didn't brush it. I didn't box it up. I walked into the kitchenette and dropped it into the trash can on top of coffee grounds and eggshells. Robert wanted freshness. He wanted reality. I would give him reality. I returned to the mirror. This wasn't a beauty routine. It was a pre-mission protocol. I applied the concealer, masking the dark purple bruises under my eyes that the chemotherapy had painted there. I contoured my hollow cheeks, not to hide the gauntness, but to sharpen it, turning my face into a weapon of angles and shadows. I lined my eyes with kohl, thick and dark. War paint. Then, the dress. I had ordered it online from a boutique in New York, draining the last of my savings. It lay on the bed, shimmering in the dim light. It wasn't black, the color of mourning. It wasn't red, the color of passion. It was marine blue. A deep midnight navy that commanded respect. I stepped into the silk, wincing as the fabric brushed against the tender skin around my chemo port. The plastic device implanted in my chest that connected directly to my jugular vein. The dress had a high neckline that concealed the port perfectly, while the back plunged low, revealing the muscles I'd built over 20 years of service. I zipped it up. It fit like armor. I slipped on my stilettos. They were 4 inches high, sharp enough to puncture a lung. I grabbed my clutch, checked for my phone, my lipstick, and my pain medication. I was no longer Tegan the victim. I was Lieutenant Colonel Willis, reporting for duty. With my armor in place, I drove straight to the nursing facility where George was staying. The hallway was quiet, smelling of antiseptic and lavender. And the click of my heels echoed sharply on the linoleum as I approached his room. George was sitting in his wheelchair by the window, looking out at the gray sky. He looked frailer than the last time I saw him. The heart failure was taking its toll, stealing the breath from his lungs bit by bit. "Colonel," I said softly. He turned. His eyes widened as they took in the silver hair, the blue dress, the steel in my spine. He didn't see a sick woman. He saw a soldier in dress blues. "My God," he whispered, a smile breaking through his oxygen mask. "You look dangerous, Tegan." "That's the plan, sir." He reached into the pocket of his cardigan and pulled out a thick manila envelope. The same one he had shown me weeks ago. The copy of the will. The death warrant for Robert's future. I had my lawyer notarize the timestamp on the morality clause. George wheezed, his hand shaking as he held it out. "Just in case Robert tries to contest it later, it's bulletproof." I took the envelope. It felt heavy in my hands, heavier than any rifle I had ever carried. This was George's legacy. It was his life's work, and he was entrusting me to detonate it. "He thinks you're dying, George," I said, my voice tight. "He called me drunk. He's celebrating it." A shadow crossed George's face, but he nodded slowly. "I know. Let him celebrate. It makes the fall that much harder." He gripped my hand with surprising strength. His skin was paper-thin, cold to the touch. "Tegan," he rasped, "tonight is not about money. It's about honor. It's about teaching that boy that actions have consequences. He thinks he can throw people away. Show him he's wrong." "I will." "Give him hell, Tegan," he commanded, his eyes burning with that old Marine Corps fire. "Yes, sir. Give him hell." I kissed his forehead. It felt like saying goodbye. I turned and walked out, clutching the envelope against my chest. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I marched straight to my car, tossed the envelope onto the passenger seat, and turned my sights toward the highway. The drive to Vermont usually took 5 hours, but tonight, nature had decided to join the war effort. By the time I hit the Massachusetts border on I-91 North, the sky had turned a bruised purple, and the first flakes of the nor'easter began to fall. Within an hour, it wasn't just snow. It was a blinding sheet of sleet and ice whipping across the highway sideways. My 10-year-old sedan rattled as the wind buffeted it. The heater struggled to keep the windshield from freezing over. My wipers slapped back and forth, thwack, 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 fighting a losing battle against the storm. Most cars had pulled over, the highway becoming a graveyard of hazard lights blinking on the shoulder. But I kept driving. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The bone pain in my legs flared up, a dull ache that synchronized with the thumping of the tires. A voice in my head whispered to turn back, reminding me that I was sick, tired, and in danger. I thought of Jessica's video, the pizza grease on the flag. I thought of Robert's laugh telling me I looked like a ghost. "Not tonight," I said to the storm. "I am not a ghost. I am the storm." I pressed the accelerator. The car fishtailed slightly on a patch of black ice, but I corrected it, steering into the skid with muscle memory honed from years of driving Humvees in bad terrain. I drove for 3 hours through the whiteout. The isolation was total. It was just me, the headlights cutting through the swirling snow, and the envelope on the passenger seat. Finally, the GPS chimed. Destination approaching on the right. I slowed down. The entrance to the Mitchell estate, my old cabin, loomed out of the darkness. Robert had installed new gates, huge, wrought iron monstrosities that looked ridiculous against the rustic Vermont woods. They were wide open. Through the trees, I could see the house. It was blazing with light. Every window was illuminated. Expensive cars, Range Rovers, Porsches, Mercedes, lined the long driveway, their hoods already dusted with snow. I pulled my battered sedan up to the valet stand. The valet, a teenager shivering in a parka, looked at my car with confusion. It was rusted, covered in road salt, and made a distinct rattling noise compared to the luxury fleet behind me. I killed the engine. The silence was sudden and heavy. I checked the mirror one last time. The silver hair was sleek. The war paint was perfect. The eyes were cold. I grabbed the envelope. I grabbed my clutch. I opened the car door and stepped out into the freezing wind. The cold bit through the thin silk of my dress, but I didn't shiver. The fire inside me was burning too hot. I walked toward the front door, the sound of jazz music and laughter spilling out into the night. They were warm. They were happy. They were oblivious. I was the enemy at the gates, and I had just breached the perimeter. The heavy oak door of the cabin swung open, carrying with it a gust of freezing wind and swirling snow that cut through the warm, perfumed air of the party like a knife. I stepped across the threshold, my stilettos clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. The same floor Jessica had painted a soulless, blinding white. The room was packed with DC's social climbers, junior partners from Robert's firm, and a handful of hangers-on who would drink anyone's champagne. A live jazz quartet was playing softly in the corner, providing a soundtrack to the laughter and the clinking of crystal. But as the cold wind swept through the room, the laughter died. Heads turned, conversations halted mid-sentence. The jazz band trailed off into an awkward silence. I stood in the entryway, the snow melting on my shoulders, the marine blue silk of my gown shimmering under the chandelier. I knew what they saw. They didn't see the Tegan they expected, the frantic, abandoned wife in a pantsuit. They saw a woman with silver hair cropped close to her skull, wearing war paint on her eyes and a dress that clung to her like a second skin. "Is that Tegan?" someone whispered near the buffet table. "My God, look at her hair," another murmured. I didn't look at them. My eyes scanned the room until they locked onto the target. Robert was standing by the whitewashed fireplace, a glass of scotch in one hand and Jessica's waist in the other. He looked flushed, happy, the king of his little stolen castle. Jessica was wearing a white cocktail dress that looked suspiciously bridal, the vintage diamond ring flashing on her finger. Robert dropped his hand from Jessica's waist. His mouth fell open. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking gray and old. He set his glass down on the mantel, right where the flag case used to be, and rushed toward me, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. "What the hell are you doing here?" he hissed, grabbing my arm. His breath smelled of expensive scotch and fear. "I told you not to come. You're making a scene." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then up at his eyes. My expression didn't change. "Unproliferate, Robert, or I will break your wrist." He flinched, releasing me as if I were red-hot metal. "Get out," he whispered furiously, glancing over his shoulder at his guests. You look like a freak. Go back to your hole, Tegan. Don't ruin this for me." Jessica appeared at his elbow, looking me up and down with a sneer that twisted her pretty face. "Oh, wow," she laughed, her voice shrill in the quiet room. "Did you escape from the ward? You look intense. Robert, call security." "There is no security, Jessica," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room without shouting. "This is a private residence, and since my name is still on the deed, I have every right to be here." I stepped around them. The crowd parted for me, a mixture of fear and fascination in their eyes. I walked straight to the small raised platform where the jazz band was set up. The lead saxophone player looked at me, terrified, and stepped back. I reached out and took the vintage microphone from the stand. Screech! The feedback pierced the room, making half the guests cover their ears. It was an ugly sound, but it demanded attention. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice was calm, commanding. It was the voice I used to brief generals. "I apologize for the interruption. I know you are all here to celebrate the future of Robert and Jessica." Robert was charging toward the stage now, panic wild in his eyes. "Tegan, stop! Don't you dare!" "But," I continued, "I felt it was important to bring a gift, a housewarming gift, to clarify exactly whose house you are warming." I reached into my clutch and pulled out the thick manila envelope. The red wax seal cracked with a satisfying snap as I tore it open. "Robert has told you all that his father, Colonel George Mitchell, is near death," I said, locking eyes with Robert, who had frozen at the foot of the stage. "He has told you that he is celebrating his imminent inheritance, $5 million, the portfolio, and this estate." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Robert looked like he was about to vomit. "However," I said, unfolding the legal document, "Robert seems to have forgotten a crucial detail of the Mitchell family trust, specifically the morality clause." "Stop her!" Robert screamed, looking around for help. "She's crazy. She's on drugs." "Section 4, paragraph B," I read, my voice cutting through his shouting. "In the event that the primary beneficiary dissolves his marriage due to his own infidelity, abandonment, or dishonorable conduct, he shall be immediately disqualified from the estate." The room went deathly silent. You could hear the wind howling outside. I have here, I held up a second packet from the envelope. Date-stamped photographs of Robert Mitchell and Jessica Davis entering the Hotel Monaco on dates that correspond to my chemotherapy sessions. I have credit card receipts. I have text messages. I looked at Jessica. She wasn't sneering anymore. She looked like a deer in headlights. And, I continued, delivering the payload, the will states clearly that in the event of disqualification, 100% of the assets, including this house, the stocks, and the cash, are to be liquidated and donated immediately to the Wounded Warrior Project. I dropped the papers on the floor. They scattered like autumn leaves at Robert's feet. You don't get the house, Robert, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that echoed in the silence. You don't get the money. You don't get the legacy. You are disinherited. For a second, nobody moved. The weight of the words hung in the air. Then, the explosion happened. It didn't come from Robert, it came from the future Mrs. Mitchell. Jessica spun around, her face contorted in pure, unadulterated horror. She grabbed Robert by the lapels of his tuxedo. What did she say? She shrieked, her voice cracking. Robert, what did she say? You told me it was $5 million. You told me the house was ours. Jess, baby, wait, she's lying. Robert stammered, his hands shaking. You said he was dying and we would be rich, Jessica screamed, shoving him backward. He stumbled, knocking over a tray of champagne flutes. Crash! The sound of shattering glass punctuated her fury. I painted this damn house for you. I put up with your boring stories for a year. You told me you had the money. The crowd gasped. The mask had fallen. The soulmate narrative dissolved instantly into the ugly reality of greed. It's gone, Jessica, I said from the stage, watching the chaos with cold satisfaction. It's all going to the veterans. The only thing Robert owns is the suit on his back and the lease on a Porsche he can no longer afford. Jessica looked at me, then at Robert. She looked at the ring on her finger, the ring that was now the only asset he had left. You loser! She spat at him. She turned and stormed toward the door, grabbing her coat from the rack. Jessica, wait! Robert yelled, humiliating himself further as he scrambled after her. I stood alone on the stage, the microphone still in my hand. The guests were staring at me with wide eyes, some in shock, some in awe. I looked at the white walls, the desecrated fireplace, the shattered glass. The air in the room had changed. It wasn't warm anymore. It was cold, hard, and clean. Semper Fi, I said into the mic. I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a dull thud. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was the silence of a battlefield after the final shot has been fired. The enemy was routed. The objective was secured. And I was still standing. The exodus was swift. In the high society circles of Washington, D.C., poverty is a contagion. And Robert Mitchell had just been diagnosed as patient zero. I stood by the desecrated fireplace and watched the friends who had been drinking Robert's champagne 5 minutes ago scramble for the door. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't make eye contact. They just grabbed their furs and their designer coats, eager to distance themselves from the stench of a disinherited man. The last one to leave was Jessica. She didn't run. She stood in the center of the whitewashed living room, staring at Robert with eyes that were no longer wide with adoration, but narrowed with calculation. She was doing the math, and the numbers didn't add up. Jess, Robert stammered, stepping toward her, his hands outstretched. Baby, listen. We can fight this. The old man is senile. I'll get a new lawyer. We can contest the will. Jessica laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound. She looked down at the vintage diamond ring on her finger, the only asset of value left in the room. And for a second, I thought she might throw it at him. Instead, she twisted it. Contest it with what money, Robert? She asked, her voice dripping with disdain. She just said everything goes to charity. The accounts are frozen, the house is gone, you're radioactive. But we have each other, he pleaded, desperate to salvage the fantasy. I did this for us, for our fresh start. I didn't sign up for a start in a rental apartment, Jessica sneered. I signed up for the Mitchell estate. I signed up for a life where I don't have to work. She pulled out her phone and tapped the screen furiously. My Uber Black is here. Don't call me Robert. Seriously, delete my number? She turned on her heel, the white bridal-style cocktail dress swirling around her legs, and marched out into the snow without looking back. The heavy oak door slammed shut with a finality that shook the window panes. And then, there were two. The silence that descended on the cabin was heavy, broken only by the howling of the nor'easter outside and the ragged breathing of the man standing in the ruins of his life. Robert didn't chase her this time. He knew it was over. He walked unsteadily to the console table, grabbed a bottle of scotch by the neck, and took a long, desperate pull. Liquor spilled down his chin, staining his tuxedo shirt. He turned to me. His eyes were bloodshot, wild, filled with a toxic mixture of humiliation and rage. "Are you happy now?" he screamed, hurling the bottle into the whitewashed wall. Smash. Amber liquid and glass exploded everywhere. "Are you satisfied, Tegan? You vindictive witch." I didn't flinch. I stood perfectly still in my blue silk gown, watching him unravel. "You planned this," he spat, stalking toward me. "You waited until tonight. You waited until everyone was here. You wanted to humiliate me. You wanted to destroy my life because I stopped loving you." He stopped inches from my face, his breath hot and acrid. "Why are you so cruel? Why are you so evil? You wanted to kill me, didn't you? You wanted to watch me die inside." I looked at him. Really looked at him. I saw the lines of selfishness etched around his mouth. I saw the hollowness in his eyes. He truly believed he was the victim. He truly believed that my reaction to his betrayal was the crime, not the betrayal itself. "I didn't want to kill you, Robert," I said. My voice was low, void of any emotion. No anger, no sadness, just facts. I reached up to the neckline of my marine blue gown. My fingers found the zipper. "And I'm not the one dying." I pulled the silk fabric down, exposing my left shoulder and the upper part of my chest. Robert recoiled as if I had pulled a knife. There, just below my collarbone, the skin was pale and translucent, and protruding from underneath it was a hard, plastic lump. The port-a-cath. The device was ugly, surrounded by fresh, yellow-purple bruising from yesterday's infusion. A thin, terrifying tube ran from the port, tunneling under my skin directly into my jugular vein. It was the mark of the beast, the mark of cancer. Robert stared at it. His eyes bulged. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "Stage 2, I said, tracing the bruise with my finger. "Invasive ductal carcinoma. Aggressive. I started chemotherapy the week you served me with the eviction notice." "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No, that's not true." "I tried to tell you," I continued, my voice hard as granite. "At Gavanni's. I had the file in my bag. I started to speak. But you cut me off. You told me I was too rigid. You told me I wasn't fresh enough. You ordered dessert while I was trying to tell you I was fighting for my life." The reality hit him like a physical blow. His legs gave out. He collapsed onto the floor, amidst the shattered glass and the spilled scotch. He looked up at me, and the arrogance was gone. In its place was a terrified, pathetic child. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the sweat and the alcohol. "Tegan," he choked out. He reached for the hem of my dress with a trembling hand. "Oh my God, I didn't know. Baby, I swear, I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I corrected him, stepping back so his hand couldn't touch the silk. "I can fix this," he blubbered, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "We can fix this. I'll fire the lawyers, I'll take care of you, I'll drive you to the appointments. Please, Tegan, don't leave me here. Not like this. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He was begging. The man who had mocked my appearance on the phone, the man who had threatened to cut off my health insurance, the man who had let his mistress use his father's flag as a napkin, was now on his knees, begging for salvation. But he wasn't crying for me. He was crying because he was alone. He was crying because he was broke. He was crying because he needed a nurse, not a wife. I looked down at him. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. I waited for the pity to come. I waited for the old love, the 20 years of history, to soften my heart. But there was nothing. just a cold, clean emptiness. I looked at the port in my chest, then back at him. "You aren't sorry you hurt me, Robert," I said. "You're sorry you lost the money." "No, no, I love you," he screamed, clutching at the air where I'd been standing. "It's too late," I said. "The Tegan you married? The one who would have forgiven you? She died in that apartment in Virginia when she had to shave her own head alone." I pulled my dress back up, covering the scar, covering the port. I adjusted my clutch. "I have a long drive back," I said. "And I have chemo on Tuesday. Unlike you, I have a battle to win." I turned my back on him. "Tegan, wait," he wailed, his voice breaking. "Semper Fi. You said Semper Fi. Always faithful. You promised." I stopped at the door. The wind was howling louder now, eager to rush in and freeze the rot inside this house. I looked over my shoulder. He was a heap of black tie and misery on the floor. "Semper Fi, Robert," I whispered. "But you were never faithful." I opened the door and walked out into the storm. The snow hit my face, cold and sharp. But it felt good. It felt like baptism. I left the door wide open behind me, letting the winter claim the house, the memories, and the man who had tried to bury me. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of the brass bell mounted on the wall of the Walter Reed Infusion Center was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It echoed through the sterile hallway, louder than the beeping monitors, louder than the hushed conversations of doctors. "Way to go, Colonel," a young nurse cheered, wiping a tear from her eye. I stood there, my hand still gripping the braided rope. My hair was no longer a silver fuzz. It was a textured, intentional pixie cut, thick and strong. The color had returned to my cheeks. The port in my chest had been removed yesterday, leaving behind only a small, pale scar, a medal of honor from a war fought in silence. "No evidence of disease," the oncologist had said, closing my file. 3 words, but they held the weight of the world. I walked out of the hospital doors and into the humid Maryland air. I didn't get into a car to drive to a lonely apartment. I got into my car to drive home. 6 months had passed since the night of the storm. The Vermont cabin didn't look like a farmhouse dream anymore. It looked like a home. The blinding white paint Jessica had slapped onto the exterior was peeling in places, but I hadn't fixed it yet. I was too busy fixing the people inside. I pulled into the driveway, the gravel crunching under my tires. The Mitchell Estate sign was gone. In its place stood a simple, hand-carved wooden sign, the George Mitchell Sanctuary for Women Veterans. On the front porch, where Jessica had once posed for TikToks, 2 women were sitting in rocking chairs. One was a former medic who had lost her leg in Afghanistan. The other was a young Navy vet dealing with severe PTSD. They were laughing. Real, deep, belly laughter that drifted through the pine trees. I stepped out of the car. I was wearing jeans and a linen shirt, sleeves rolled up. No uniform, no armor, just Tegan. "Welcome back, Tegan," the medic called out. "Did you get the news?" "Clean bill of health," I smiled, giving them a thumbs up. They cheered. It was a victory for the whole house. We were a platoon again. I walked into the kitchen. It smelled of coffee and cinnamon, not stale pizza and White Claw. The massive oak table, the one where the flag had been desecrated, was now covered in maps, books, and therapy journals. It was a place of planning and healing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Helen, my lawyer. "Hey, Helen," I answered, pouring myself a mug of coffee. "Please tell me the paperwork for the nonprofit status is finalized." "It is," Helen said, her voice crisp. "You are officially a 501c3. The George Mitchell Sanctuary is legal. The endowment from the trust is fully funded." "Thank God," I breathed. "George would have loved this." "He would," Helen agreed. Then her tone shifted. "I also have an update on the other matter, since you asked me to keep tabs." "Robert?" "Yes, Robert." Helen paused, and I could practically hear her smirking through the phone. "He was let go from the firm last month. Apparently the scandal of the disinheritance and the public scene at the party made him a liability. Clients didn't want a lawyer who got outsmarted by his own father's will. He's unemployed? I asked, walking toward the large bay window overlooking the lake. Not exactly. He found a job. He's selling term life insurance over the phone. Cold calling, commission only. I took a sip of coffee. The irony was rich. The man who waited for death to make him rich was now selling death benefits to strangers for peanuts. And his living situation? I asked. That's the kicker, Helen said. He couldn't afford the lease on his condo downtown. He moved out to Virginia. Alexandria, actually. She read out the address. I stopped breathing for a second. It was the same address. The same peeling apartment complex. The same boiled cabbage hallway. The same thin walls where I had shaved my head and punched a hole in the plaster. He's in Unit 4B, Helen said. Just 2 doors down from your old unit. I closed my eyes. Karma wasn't just a concept. It was a boomerang. Robert was now living in the very hell he had forced me into. He was sleeping on a cheap mattress, listening to the neighbors argue, realizing exactly what he had thrown away. Thanks, Helen, I said. That's sufficient. Do you want me to send him a card? Helen joked. No, I said. Silence is louder. I hung up the phone. I walked over to the mantel. The fireplace was restored, the white paint stripped away to reveal the warm brick underneath. In the center of the mantel sat a new shadow box. Inside was a neatly folded American flag, the one that had draped George's coffin 3 months ago. He had passed away peacefully in his sleep just weeks after I took over the house. We gave him a full military funeral. Taps was played. The rifles fired 3 volleys. And when the Marine Honor Guard folded the flag, they didn't hand it to Robert, the weeping, disinherited son standing awkwardly in the back. They handed it to me. Next to the flag lay his Navy Cross, and a small handwritten note he had left for me in the envelope that night. To my daughter Tegan, the only Mitchell with a spine. Keep the fire burning. I touched the glass of the shadow box. I'm keeping it burning, Dad, I whispered. I walked out the back door, down the stone path to the edge of the lake. The summer sun was setting, painting the water in shades of gold and violet. The air was warm on my skin. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs that were clear, healthy, and free. I thought about the woman who had signed that napkin at Gavanni's. She was scared. She was broken. She thought her life was over. She was wrong. Her life was just beginning. I didn't need a husband to define me. I didn't need a wig to make me beautiful. I didn't need an apology from a man who couldn't understand the word honor. I had my sisters in arms inside that house. I had my health. I had my dignity. I looked up at the sky, where the first stars were starting to appear. Semper Fi, I said to the universe, and for the first time in a long time, the universe seemed to answer back with a gentle breeze that ruffled the water, washing away the footprints of the past. The war was over. The ambush was survived. Mission accomplished. My journey wasn't just about getting revenge on a cheating husband or reclaiming a house. It was about realizing that my worth didn't disappear just because one man stopped seeing it. Whether you are facing a divorce, a terrifying diagnosis, or a betrayal that feels like the end of the world, remember this. You are the commander of your own life. Do not let anyone treat you like a casualty in your own story. Hold the line, protect your peace, and never forget that true family isn't always about blood. It is about who stands by you in the storm. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to rebuild your life from the ashes? Have you ever had to stand up to someone who underestimated your strength? Please share your story in the comments below. Your voice might be the exact encouragement someone else needs to read today. If my victory gave you hope or a sense of justice, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience. Let's build a community where loyalty and honor still matter. Until next time, stay strong and semper fi.